Welcome to the first episode in a Legendarium series about the strange story of Perkin Warbeck. In part 1, A King in Exile, we will talk about how a Flemish apprentice was transformed into an exiled king. During the year 1485, Henry Tudor became King Henry VII of England. In any other time, Henry Tudor would have never come close to the English throne. Yet Henry Tudor did not live during ordinary times. The seeds of war germinated in 1377 when King Edward III died after 50 years on the throne. King Edward III lived only a year longer than his famed eldest son, Richard the Black Prince, the victor of Poitiers. So the throne passed to the 10-year-old Richard II, grandson of Edward III and son of the Black Prince. This skipped over the Black Prince's 3 brothers, especially the Lancaster line descended from Edward's 3rd son, and the York line descended from his 4th. Had Richard II proved a capable king, this would have mattered little. However, he proved a capricious and cruel monarch, unable to govern England effectively. His cousin, Henry of Lancaster, overthrew him in 1399 and lived long enough to pass the throne to his son, King Henry V. Of course, King Henry V is renowned as the victor of Agincourt, where the English defeated a French army more than twice their size. William Shakespeare made Henry V into one of the English-speaking world's greatest military heroes in the play which bears his name. Yet lesser known is the fact that when King Henry V died of camp fever in 1422, he left England overextended and taxed into near poverty. His early death left the 9-month-old King Henry VI on the throne. He grew into a weak-willed and feeble-minded man known for his profound piety, but with few other virtues. His advisors convinced him to marry Margaret of Anjou to bolster their fading fortunes in France. Beautiful, ambitious, and ruthless, she packed her husband's court with her flunkies, most notably the Dukes of Somerset and Norfolk. While they helped themselves to the royal treasury, English armies suffered one catastrophe after another in France. This led to a generation-long civil war between the houses of York and Lancaster for the throne of England. The war reached its bloody climax when Richard of York, better known as Richard III, overthrew his young nephews Richard and King Edward V, locked them up in the Tower of London, and both boys disappeared. Richard declared himself king, but did not hold the throne for long. Even in a harsh time, the brazenness of Richard's coup and the horror of the 2 nephews likely being murdered split the Yorkist court. Henry Tudor arrived with an army including English exiles and French hirelings, and confronted Richard III at Bosworth Field. Richard single-handedly cut down Henry's standard-bearer and unhorsed the massive John Cheney, a grizzled mountain of a man. He looked everywhere for his adversary, but Henry Tudor disguised himself as an infantry soldier. Nonetheless, Richard fought to within just a few sword lengths of Henry Tudor before the Tudor army regrouped. Suddenly, Henry's men started pushing Richard back almost 1,000 feet to the edge of a swampy marsh. Richard's horse tumbled in the wet ground, throwing the king to the earth. Richard III bellowed, "God forbid that I retreat one step! I will either win the battle as a king or die as one." By the time Richard did indeed die as a king, he suffered 11 gruesome wounds. A halberd completely sliced off the back of his skull and drove part of his helmet into the bone, one of 9 wounds to Richard's head. Of course, the newly crowned King Henry VII married Elizabeth of York. Together, the royal couple had 7 children named Arthur, Margaret, Henry, Mary, Elizabeth, Edmund, and Catherine. When Henry came into the world, his grandmother, Margaret Beaufort, wrote of it in her Book of Hours, a guide to personal devotion, which also recorded Beaufort family history. In a sign of Henry's relative unimportance, Grandmother Margaret mistook the date of her second grandson's birth and scratched out the first entry to write in a correct second entry. His elder brother Arthur would be heir, while Henry would merely be the spare. Arthur and Henry hardly knew each other. While Arthur went to Ludlow Castle in the Welsh Marches with an entourage of cuties and counselors to learn how to reign, Henry remained in the family seat of Elton. Indeed, very early in Henry's life, a well-dressed foreigner suddenly appeared on the streets of Cork in Ireland, then still independent of Tudor rule. He attracted much attention with his polished manners and fancy dress. Two Yorkist exiles living in Cork decided him to be Richard, Duke of York, one of the two princes who vanished in the Tower of London 8 years ago. The foreigner, of course, would have been the proper age that Duke Richard would have been, about 17 or 18 years old. They approached him and acclaimed him as the Earl of Warwick, which flattered the silk-draped youth enough for him to join the Yorkists. Soon enough, the Yorkist rebels brought Perkin Warbeck to the Netherlands. In truth, Perkin Warbeck was an 18-year-old Fleming who traveled to Cork so he could model clothes for a Flemish merchant living in Ireland. His backers hoped that he could restore the Yorkist cause and restart the Wars of the Roses. They filled Warbeck's lodgings with the royal arms of England. They included the Latin legend, "The arms of Richard, Prince of Wales and Duke of York, son and heir of Edward IV, sometime King of England and France and Lord of Ireland." He claimed to have been permitted to escape by a remorseful guard who refused to kill him when his brother died under assassin's blades, a story accepted by those who wanted to believe it. Perkin, a new Cinderella, found that he enjoyed the glass slipper that the Yorkist exiles offered him, and he set out to find a kingdom. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.